was every year we would run an exercise, a tabletop exercise. Well, we rehearsed the build of the fabric routinely, but we also ran a tabletop exercise to go through all those sorts of contingencies. What would happen if it was raining? What would happen if there was a fire somewhere or a security incident? So yes, there are lots of variations of the plan to cope with all those sorts of contingencies. But can I just make one point, which I think is relevant to what you were saying with your panel earlier, and that was what the relevance of all this pageantry is. Of course, it shows us off. It's very glitzy. It's a great advertising for the UK. More tourists are likely to come to London, and so on and so on. But the international broadcasters have been asking me, what's the point of the pageantry? And I think some people in this country wonder that as well. And I think one of the major points of the pageantry is that, rather like Westminster Hall that was built 1,000 years ago, our monarchy has been going for 1,000 years. And these traditions, customs, uniforms, archaic ways of doing things are part of our heritage. And I think there are two key things that they demonstrate. One is they are part of the fibers that make up the fabric of the nation that we are, the national identity that we have. And I think the second thing is that it reminds us of the heritage of our very stable democracy compared to some of the regimes as head of states that you see in other countries, even around Europe.
Well, some of the regimes that were in the Abbey today. Thank you very much indeed, Lieutenant General David Lee. Congratulations on your role in helping it all go so swimmingly. I know every Black Rod would have put a lot of a backbone into this, and it was magnificent success. So thank you very much. Ken, just coming back to you, I want to talk to you just personally. You know, you've been around the royal family for a very long time, obviously protecting them, and they're very well protected today. When you look at William, Harry, who you've known since they were tiny boys, and they're in the procession, but there's no real contact between them that we've seen even in the 10 days. Very little eye contact, no apparent talking. It seems to be a temporary truce to put their grandmother first, but underneath it, this rift that continues to rage. What do you make of that, and what do you think Charles can possibly do to try and get through all this?
Piers, you're absolutely right. You know, there is clearly a rift, but this is very much ceremonial. They're on duty, and that's a very important word for those of the royal family, because it's all about a sense of duty. I mean, Harry had no choice. He had to be there. You know, the fact that he was in uniform today was on the assistance of his father. But, you know, the ER initials were removed from...
I thought that was churlish. Well, if you're going to let Prince Andrew have ER on his shoulder, then why wouldn't you let Harry have it on his?
I don't disagree with you. I do think it was a bit churlish because, you know, this is a state event. And let's be honest, that Harry himself is the only member of the royal family recently that has actually fought a campaign in Afghanistan. And he alone should, I think, been allowed to do that with all the insignia.
This seemed a bit churlish. I mean, look, I've got no truck for Harry's behaviour in the recent years, but this was his grandmother. He did serve his country with great valour, 2 tours of Afghanistan. And we've already had the row about the uniform to start with, where Andrew was given dispensation to wear his, and then eventually Harry was allowed to wear his. But to then remove the ER and have it sent to him without the initials of his own grandmother, I just thought, don't be churlish, and actually don't fuel his own innate sense of victimhood, right? Just don't give him an excuse to moan again.
But I don't know exactly what the protocol on that was. But what's clearly to me, I mean, what I do know is that, you know, the Prince of Wales, when he was told that, you know, some 5 years ago to take on greater responsibility, given the state of the health of the Duke of Edinburgh then and the Queen herself, you know, he was already planning his kingship, and wanted at that point very much Harry and William to be part of that move towards a new monarchy. I actually think that he still believes in that, Piers. How he can actually bring that about, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows.
No, I mean, it'll be fascinating what happens. I mean, if Harry brings this book out and it spray guns the royal family all over again, as he did with the Oprah interview, I mean, all hell's going to break loose. And I think it would be very disloyal towards his father, who, from what I'm told, is completely bemused about why his son has turned rogue on him.
Yeah, well, listen, we had this discussion a few days ago, and I hesitated on a decision. I said there should be reflection. And I himself had a reflection, Piers. I do think that now, given all that's happened in the last 10 days, I think Harry really should be considered about actually sort of ending this story and saying, look, this book isn't the right idea.
Yeah.
Because what's it going to do? It's going to cause a great deal of hurt, a great deal of damage.
I just think they should stop talking about the royals. They've left the country. They've left royal duty. They apparently wanted freedom and privacy, and yet all they do is constantly give interviews or public statements or podcasts or books, whatever it may be, in which they trash their family and the monarchy. And at some point, you've got to think, why are you doing this? How are you getting happiness or freedom by continuing to do it? They made the Queen's life more difficult in her last 2 years. You know, Philip had died and she was in ill health. She must have been hating what they were doing to the brand of the royal family. So I just don't get what they think their end game is, other than enriching themselves, but at what cost of their happiness?
But I think a lot of people share your view, Piers, and I'm actually moving that way. The one thing that Harry and Meghan lack is a good advisor, is someone to sort of really steer.
Well, they've got American, Los Angeles publicists.
But that's not good enough,
no.
because, they're in it for their own ends.
Yeah.
I mean, but it needs an advisor, someone with a real knowledge and understanding of what the king himself knows.
Do you know the real shame of it is, if they had just carried on in the same vein they did up to their wedding, where they were very popular in this country, and they represented a very different, more diverse couple in the royal family, and they were getting great credit and praise for that. If they carried on just being as they were then, I think they'd have been very popular and quite beloved members of the family, and could now be real weapons for King Charles to take the monarchy forward with a slightly more youthful and diverse way. As it is, they're sort of running this rival royal family over in California, and it's causing constant friction. Anyway, we'll see how that all washes up. Ken, great to see you. I often think about you with these things because you were around them all when they were all kids, and I think that and I know, Diana would have hated the fact the boys aren't talking. She would have been, I think, really distraught by it. Yeah,
well, I mean, I sort of have fond memories of working at that time, and I'm coming more around to your view on this, Piers, but I do think that Harry is unhappy with his situation.
Yeah.
I do think now, particularly because he's been here, and I think he realises that this is where he should be. And I know deep down that his father wants him to be part of this new move in this new monarchy.
But
let's hope to see where it goes.
It's a two-way street. Well, King Charles III and other members of the royal family are in St George's Chapel in Windsor for a private family service right now. Details of the service have not been disclosed, with Buckingham Palace calling it a deeply personal family occasion. What we do know is that the Queen will be buried with Prince Philip next to his coffin, and I think that's one ray of happiness for all of us, that they've been reunited on this otherwise very sad day. Well, after the state funeral at Westminster Abbey, thousands lined the streets to see Her Majesty's very final journey to St George's Chapel in Windsor. Two of her beloved corgis were there to greet her, and a more intimate gathering awaited inside the chapel that she knew from childhood. The crown jeweller removed the instruments of state, the imperial state crown, the orb and sceptre from the coffin, before they were placed on the altar, symbolising very poignantly the end of the Queen's reign. And for the first time ever, the breaking of the wand was televised, a ritual marking the end of a Lord Chamberlain's service to a monarch. The Queen's coffin was then lowered into the royal vault alongside the coffins of 25 previous royals. And right now, the late Queen is being laid to rest, as I said, beside her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. After a life lived and mourned in public, this moment, and it feels right, will belong only to her closest family. Really was a stunning day, wasn't it? With so many extraordinary moments and visuals of this country really at its very best. There's a live shot we just took a few minutes ago of Westminster Bridge tonight, looking absolutely magnificent. The bridge, of course, that leads into Parliament and, of course, to Buckingham Palace. What a sight that is. What a sight the whole capital city has been today. And here's Windsor Castle tonight. Darkness has, of course, fallen, but you can see there the flickering light and flag. An amazing final resting place for Majesty the Queen, of course. Well, joining me now from Windsor is Jeremy Kyle, my Talk TV colleague, who's been in Windsor all day. Jeremy, what's it been like down there? I mean, I was at Buckingham Palace, where there were huge crowds all day long, and there was a mixture of emotions, I would say. Very quiet and respectful for large periods, breaking into applause at certain points, some tears, some laughter. I mean, it was a sort of range of emotions, really. Was it like that at Windsor?
Exactly, Piers, to be fair. It was extraordinary. I live in Windsor, as you know, and I've never seen so many people. And I said earlier, the Queen transcended, I think, almost every different part of our population. And people teemed into Windsor today, mate. I would say 250,000 minimum. And when that hearse came down the Long Walk, there was this incredible hush. There was like this sort of serenity, this sort of acceptance that this was the final goodbye, and she was passing on, and King Charles would be acceding to the throne, etc., etc. But you're right, a sort of wave of emotions. People crying, people cheering, clapping as she went past, people throwing flowers. But it felt I was very proud to be part of it, mate, to be honest. Yes. It was very emotional, but it was also very historical. You know, a moment that you'll go, I was there, I saw her 70 years on the throne.
Yeah, I felt that very strongly at Buckingham Palace. While we've been talking, the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Kate, have tweeted goodbye to a queen, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother, which I think says it all from the family point of view, is that she was our queen. She was their queen, of course, too. But essentially, for them, this was the matriarch of their family.
Absolutely, the sort of fulcrum by which it all, succeeded. And of course, no doubt, you and I, are cut from the same cloth. There will be people who say, will the monarchy survive? Of course it will survive. When you look at who came today, when you look at how the world, 4 billion people, watched us do what we do best in the most incredible way. Of course, we'll never see the like of a lady. 70 years on the throne. Somebody said to me the other day, Piers, that everybody under 70 whatever has never known anything else. It will be a change, and King Charles will not reign for as long as her by any stretch of the imagination. And the monarchy will, yes, be slimmed down, and we've heard about all the problems. But for me, today's about remembering this incredible woman who, at 24, 25, said, however long I've got, I will serve you, the British people. And she did that in the most incredible way. Just, 2 days before she passed, there she was accepting Liz Truss, saying, make a new government. And she was about selfless service, and I think that we as a country could learn so much. And actually, also I was thinking today, with all that's going on in the world, in our world, the United Kingdom, why is it that we can come together so brilliantly at these times? Why can't we bottle that, Piers, and use that going forward? Because that would have been, I think, exactly what she'd have wanted.
I completely agree, and it is a real problem that we're becoming ever more divided as a country. It's not just a problem here, it's the same in America. I think toxic tribalism on social media has made people angry. It's made people constantly confrontational. I think that it's a real problem. Facts don't seem to matter anymore. People just take a position with a tribe, a side, and then they scream at each other morning, noon and night. And, it was a real moment of unity today, but in a way, probably because the Queen actually was completely non-partisan. We never knew what she thought about any big issue. So she never instantly polarised people. If she'd come out and said, actually, I think Brexit's a bad idea, half the country would have hurled abuse at her on Twitter. That's where we've got to. And it's a completely ridiculous state of affairs. There were another part of today I thought, Jeremy, I thought was great. With the armed forces, just in all their magnificent splendour. And I was on air for Fox in America, and I said, you've got to remember, these are not just ceremonial people. They're not just doing this to show off their uniform. These are our fighting forces, the very elite, from the Royal Marines to the Gurkhas to the RAF to the Royal Navy. And actually, I got a tweet, a wonderful tweet, in the middle of it from a woman called Lisa Moyer, who said, "My son is part of the gun carriage crew. He's directly behind the coffin, second in on our right. We are unbelievably proud parents." And I responded just saying, "So you should be. He's done the nation proud." And I was delighted to see she was bombarded with messages of gratitude from the public. And I think there must be so many little stories of these armed forces today, from the young sailors by the gun carriage to the most experienced people in the Queen's Guards, the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, all of them, to a man and woman, were just absolutely perfect, both in the way that they looked
amazing.
And the way they conducted themselves.
I think that's right, and actually, we've done an interview for you later. A lady, a squadron leader in the RAF, Piers, 31 years service. She'd been to the Falklands, she'd been to Afghanistan, and I interviewed her. She was here with her mother who had just recovered and her 2 kids, and the pride. She said, I've come here today for the boss. It wasn't a job, it was an honour and a privilege, and she was so humble, and every one of those 31 days I did for her. And you're right, there will be stories, the length and breadth of this country. And I go back to what I said, why can't we come together as we did today? Because old and young, where I've been today, Piers, from 14 and 15-year-olds to 80 and 90-year-olds, everybody of the same opinion that this incredible woman gave us all so much. And maybe in her memory, actually, what we can give her back is to be, as we've both said, just to try and get on with our lives and I mean, we've all heard about the Duke of York and Harry and that blimmin' woman and all that, but actually what happened today was she transcended all those arguments. She transcended every single part of divisiveness we have in this country, and that's why everybody came together. And if we could bottle that, it would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I completely agree. Well said, Jeremy. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, mate.
Majesty took place inside the historic Westminster Abbey. World leaders, world royalty, and every living British Prime Minister looked on, as well as an estimated audience of billions on television worldwide. Well, quite a moment for my next guest, Ian Greenshields, moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, who read a prayer in the service.
Let us give thanks to God for Queen Elizabeth's long life and reign, recalling with gratitude her gifts of wisdom, diligence, and service. O God, from whom cometh everything that is upright and true, accept our thanks for the gifts of heart and mind that thou didst bestow upon thy daughter Elizabeth, and which she showed forth among us in her words and deeds.
I'm delighted to say that the Right Reverend Dr. Ian Greenshields is with me now, along with former newspaper editor Emily Sheffield, Talk TV presenter Richard Tice. Thank you so much for coming to the show tonight. What a day you must have had. I mean, it was extraordinary enough for us to watch it, but to be actually participating in the historic occasion of this Queen's funeral must have been, even for you who've done a lot of stuff, quite an amazing moment.
Yes, I think it was. I mean, I think it was a culmination of so many historic moments, beginning with the Queen's death in Scotland and the service in St Giles, and now the service in Westminster, and of course the further service that followed that. It just was that very profound sense of history that was there in the making in that moment.
And you spent the last weekend with Her Majesty up in Scotland, and you had this remarkable time with her, not knowing, of course, it would be the last time you'd see her. To go from that to reading at her funeral, I mean, that's an extraordinary 2 weeks you've had in your life.
I know. And there was no sense in which you would have said that she was frail. She was 96. But there was no sense that you would have thought that this was somebody who was imminently going to die. Quite the opposite. She was very engaged, very articulate. Memory was great.
What did you talk about, if you don't mind me asking? Presumably you can now say it because the Queen is sadly no longer here. But, I mean, what were the conversations like? Because they were some of the last conversations she ever had with anybody.
her love of Balmoral.
Yeah.
That was something that she spoke of more than once. Talked about her mother, her father being there, her being there, the joy that it brought her as a place, the peace that it brought her as a place as well. That was something she spoke about. She spoke about the church that I belonged to. That's one of the reasons that I was there, and that she valued as well. You know, she was quite a character. She knew her stuff. That was one of the things that was quite remarkable about her.
I interviewed, actually, the former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, today. And he was saying the thing about meeting the Queen, he met her a few times, got to know her quite well, was that because she'd met almost every interesting person who's ever lived in the last 70 years, including every world leader, every scientist, every expert, everyone, she had extraordinary wisdom and knowledge, which she just amassed over time, where she basically knew a lot about a lot.
Yes, I mean, I asked her who the most interesting person was that she'd met, and she refused to answer that question.
Really? Really?
Very smart.
Well, yeah.
Very smart
You
of
could
her.
see that. I asked her what her favourite hymn was. She refused to answer
Really?
that. What
But she
her
wouldn't,
favourite-
you see, even to the end, she wouldn't give controversial opinions,
That's
right?
right, that's right.
Which was a great side to her. I mean, I was quite interested to read one of Nelson Mandela's relatives, because we're trying to think of other world events in my lifetime, certainly, which could be even close to this. One would have been Mandela's funeral, no question. The funeral of John Paul, the Pope, the second, was huge. Kennedy's funeral after he was assassinated and so on. I don't think any of them came close to what we saw today. But her relationship with Mandela was quite interesting, because apparently his family always used to tease him, because whenever he spoke to the Queen, he called her Elizabeth. And they say, you cannot call the Queen Elizabeth. And he would reply, well, why not? She calls me Nelson. But they found a commonality together, which she was so good at that. She would never have taken offence at him calling her Elizabeth. She'd totally understand that he didn't mean that in any derogatory way. And there was obviously great warmth between them. When you were having these last conversations, I don't want to labour the point, because I'd imagine it's also probably quite painful memories to you, given what happened after. But given you were in this sort of moment of history, did she look back at all and reflect on her life, on her reign?
She spoke about her faith,
Yeah.
but then she would do that to somebody who's a minister, I suppose.
But
that
it was
would be-
hugely important to her, wasn't
And
it?
it was. And she spoke about having no regrets about the faith that she had. She spoke about how important it was to her. Some of the unique characters that she'd met as well, Billy Graham being one of them.
Who she asked to meet, I think.
Yes.
Was it her request?
Yeah. I think she had did she have a sense that maybe something was going to happen?
That's what I wondered.
I mean,
Looking back, do you think maybe she did?
Well, you know how sometimes subconsciously,
Yes.
when you look back, somebody has said something to you, and then you think, I wonder why they said that, because it materialised. My own mother did that on the night before she died.
Really?
She was just talking about death and what happened when you die, and I wonder whether there was something of that.
Did the Queen
with
mention dying at all, or death? Or?
No, she didn't, but she was prepared. You could tell that very clearly.
And her faith, I guess, consequentially, would have been that much more important in that moment of realising that her life might be coming to an end.
Yeah.
Because it would be then the next stage of her life and her faith.
Yes, I gave her a gift before I left. I had crosses made by folks in Glenocle Prison, and I said to her, what can you give to the person who has everything? And she kind of smiled at me then, and I presented her with a cross and explained it to her. And she very graciously took it from me and then just wished me the best, all the best, and left the room. And that was the last I saw her. Yeah.
When you stood up to speak today, did you feel that the weight of history on your shoulders? Because 4 billion people apparently may have been watching.
Yeah, I didn't try to think of it that too much. I felt more in Edinburgh. That was the case when I was preaching in Edinburgh and took the sermon there. I felt less so here. I felt I was part of something bigger in that sense.
Did the new king speak to you afterwards?
No.
You didn't get a chance. I guess everything was moving on so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, I found this completely fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating. And the fact that she said that Balmoral was her place of peace.
That's right.
I think is really interesting.
I think,
really
I mean,
interesting.
maybe I only knew that from The Crown, but I feel like that Balmoral, that Scotland, I mean, actually, it may have been the film The Queen with Helen Mirren, when she's going up through the grounds of Balmoral and she sees the big stag and everything, and just the beauty, the wildness, but also the privacy that she had there, I think.
But I think she will have known her own health, and I think it was her final act of duty to the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
I think she knew that her time was near, and that Scotland, Balmoral was where she
My
wanted to be.
favourite Balmoral story was the guy, I think it was on Sky or something, and he worked with the Queen at Balmoral, one of her pages or valets or something. And he was asked to reminisce, and he said that he'd been walking with her in the Balmoral estate, and they come across 2 American tourists who didn't recognise the Queen. And so they start talking, and they say to the Queen, "Oh, do you have a holiday home here?" She went, "Actually, I do, yes, just over the hill, Balmoral." And they said, "Oh, well, really? So you come here often?" "I do, yeah." "Oh, you must have met the Queen." And she said, "Well, I haven't, but he has," pointing to the valet or the page, whatever it was, or security guy, whatever he was. And he chuckled. And then the American couple says, "Well, what's she like?" And I think he said something like, "I think she could be a bit cantankerous," with the Queen roaring with laughter. And then they asked the Queen to take a picture of them with this famous guy who knew the Queen, who'd met the Queen. And then they did do one with the Queen as well, all 4 of them. And the Queen apparently chuckled afterwards and went, "I just can't wait to hear." She said, "I wish I could be a fly on the wall when he gets home," those 2. And they show their family the holiday snaps. "Oh, well, look, we met this really famous guy who met the Queen." I'm like, that is the Queen!
But that was her sense of humour.
Yeah.
That sense of mischief. I mean, you experienced it.
Just going to reset. Just wait here a moment, because I think I'd like to continue this conversation. I'd like to take a short moment now to reflect on Her Majesty's extraordinary life. Today we mourned, but we also remembered. We commemorated a famous pledge fulfilled.
I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
We can all share the Queen's hope, which in life and death inspired her servant leadership. Service in life, hope in death. All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, "We will meet again."
Well, it's 8:01. Welcome to the second hour of a special programme on the day of the funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the greatest Britain. It's been a deeply moving day for all of us, I think, of grief, but also gratitude and celebration of a life extraordinarily well lived. It's also been spectacular, hasn't it? Without any question, a moment of great history, a day I don't think any of us will ever forget. We're back with my panel. Just didn't want to leave it there, because I wanted just to get your final recollections, really, or thoughts about the Queen. As we move now to a new era, a new monarch, a new country in many ways, how do you think history will remember her?
I wonder if she realised how much she was loved.
Yes.
I think she probably realised she was very much respected and admired, but I wonder how much she realised she was loved. And I think when you listen to everything that's come across in the last 10 days or so, that's come across very, very strongly from people right across the United Kingdom.
I mean, I feel grateful, Richard Tice, that we had the Platinum Jubilee, because I was told, I don't know, back in February, March, that there were serious concerns about her health, and there was a chance she may not make the Jubilee. And I was told this by somebody who knew, who was hearing this from senior family. And so they were all incredibly relieved that she did actually hang on long enough to enjoy what turned out to be a fantastic celebration of her reign in her lifetime, where she was still there to understand what we thought about.
But there was a sense, actually, Piers, that she rallied. She rallied for that extraordinary occasion, in the same way I think she actually rallied in order to bring in the 15th Prime Minister. I think that we will always say she was always there. She was the constant. and we now know just how much she was admired all over the world.
Yes, I agree. What are your final thoughts about the Queen?
Oh, gosh, so many. I mean,
it's hard to crystallise it,
I think
it?
It's very hard to crystallise. I also think it's going to be quite interesting how everybody feels tomorrow and in the coming days, because we've had this huge... first there's the shock, then we've had this 9 days. People have joined that queue, which became like a pilgrimage, which was sort of quite staggering, really. I spoke to a woman on radio on Saturday who was 70 and had done 12 hours, and I said, were you tired? Didn't your feet hurt? And she said, no, the spirit just carried me through. She adored the Queen so much. She's from Jamaica. And I think it's going to be quite interesting how this week goes, because there is going to be, quite understandably, a moment of sort of dip.
Do you know what I thought?
And I think particularly maybe for the royal family, and you wonder with
they're
Prince
going to have,
Charles,
I think they have
that
now
moment
a week...
of faith is going to, his faith is going to carry him
But I think
through.
they now have a week of private mourning where they just disappear now from sight, and they have a chance to mourn as a family. I mean, I thought that the queue, in many ways, was quite interesting, actually. Even Americans on American television today were talking about the queue, and they never know what the word means. They say line, but the queue has become this world-famous thing. This British queue for the British monarch.
I described it as the queue of all queues.
Yeah. But there were several things about the queue which really moved me. One was just hearing all the stories from the people being interviewed all the time. I found it quite mesmerising. Secondly, seeing them, how they actually paid the respects. I found that live stream mesmerising. I just used to watch it for like half an hour every now and again. And you just see people either nodding or muttering thank you or curtsying, whatever it was. Just so simple, but so respectful and so moving. And then there was the last person in the queue today, who turned out to be a woman who was in the RAF. We're not quite sure what she did, but I'm sure the papers will tell us tomorrow. And she had been twice. So she'd gone through once and then gone straight back to the back of the queue and queued all over again and was actually the last person to come in. And I thought, well, that doesn't epitomise the Queen's stoicism, determination, respect, dignity, all those things that the Queen represents, then nothing does.
But don't you rather hope that, in the same way when we went out and clapped the NHS, there was a moment of real unity? And I hope, and I remember keeping that sort of inside me for quite a long time afterwards, and I still think back... I do hope that we do take something more profound from this.
I totally agree.
As a country, we came together, and that stays with us in some way. We don't all just go back where everyone's being horrible on social media and everyone's going, everything's completely awful and this country's awful. I do think
why don't we just ask each other?
She wanted to leave us something.
Well, I think, Reverend Greenshills, to end this part of the show, I just think if we all just take a moment every now and again and say, well, what would the Queen do in this situation? What would she say? What would she feel? We won't go far wrong, because her basic gut instinct for what represented the greatest of British values actually is what made this country great. And we've deviated way too far from what she stood for. And I, by the way, include myself. I'm not claiming to be some virtuous person here. I think I've been watching it going, what can we learn? What can we learn? And actually, it's going back a bit, actually. Reset and go back to those great values. Thank you to my panel. And what an honour for you, and how brilliantly you delivered it, and how extraordinary that you were with the Queen and that last weekend. And you must have just remarkable memories you'll never lose.
Never forget,
Yeah, great to see you. Thank you very much. And thank you both for coming in. I want to go now to Rupert Bell, who's our Talk Radio royal correspondent. Rupert, your brother was actually at St George's Chapel there as part of the racing community and Westminster Abbey, indeed. And in fact, I know somebody else who was there purely because of the racing connection as well. So a lot of racing people seem to have been involved today, which would have been how the Queen would have wanted it.
Absolutely. It has to be, because I know all those trainers, just as you were talking to the person from the church, they were talking to her right to the very end. And I know from my own brother's experience, he was talking to her the last week, and he always relished his conversations with the Queen about horses, not only the horses that often ran for him not particularly well for the Queen, but he put on a brave face, and she was very philosophical about it, but she would want to talk about everything. And I know what it's a huge privilege for, well, my family and for my brother that he was able to train for her, and he had plenty of winners. He trained the winner that was the first horse trained by the in the Queen's colours that was ridden by Hayley Turner, a lady jockey. So he had some wonderful memories, and I know as a family we do as well. But I think the important thing was the brain was absolutely still on the money right to the very end, as we've heard from every person, you know, even Liz Truss. And that's, I think, what has sort of taken everyone by surprise, that she was still able to operate, yet the suddenness of what happened. When you think, Piers, that 2 weeks ago we were announcing a new Prime Minister and all that entailed, and then we fast forward to today, we've just seen the most extraordinary outpouring of affection from this country, both here in London at Westminster Abbey and then subsequently at St George's Chapel and all those people in between. It's been the most extraordinary seismic moment in our country's history.
Yeah, and Rupert, the pallbearers, the fascinating story behind them, all from the 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards. I'm told that there were a pool of around 30 who've been basically rehearsing this for quite some time, and that 5 of them actually were flown back from Iraq where they've been in operational duties. So these are obviously serving soldiers. What do you know about these pallbearers? Because they've become national heroes. I mean, I think that particularly when they were going up the steps at St George's Chapel, carrying this huge, heavy coffin, tremendous pressure on them.
Yeah, well, I'm an ex-Grenadier, so for me, as an ex-Grenadier, hugely proud. Yes, I know the Queen's Company, as it's still named, it won't be called the King's Company until maybe a week down the line. So those soldiers from the Queen's Company, the 1st Battalion, it's now the only battalion of the Grenadier Guards, but of course they were hugely important throughout the ceremonial duties today. But those 8 soldiers who were carrying the coffin, I mean, 5 of them were in Iraq just 10 days ago. And so they've had to rehearse within non-stop since then. And of course they're rehearsing with a coffin that weighs exactly the same. And the young ensign who was part of that party was only commissioned last September. So from a Grenadier point of view, as I am, an ex-Grenadier and a pretty ordinary one at that too, it's a huge sense of pride that the Grenadiers were at the heart of it again. And those young men, it was the pressure on them, because that is not an easy job, to actually carry that up those steps in St George's Chapel. But also, it actually shows the commitment of the whole ceremonial aspect of what happened today. There were soldiers, and service women coming from all corners of the globe to take part in that. 6,000 of them having to make sure their part didn't let the bit down. Clearly, those guardsmen were in the front line, as it were, because they had some serious, moments to do into St George's Chapel, Westminster Abbey and other elements. Yeah. But you've actually got to give your heart to every single serviceman and woman, because they were equally as committed to the cause. And as an ex-military man, they did this country proud, and they have rightly achieving all the plaudits, because it was magical at every step of the way today. It was completely magnificent. Thank you very much, Rupert Bell. Appreciate you joining me. Well, joining me now is another military man who attended the late Queen's funeral today, the former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt. Lord Dannatt, great to have you, because I can't even imagine what it was like to be actually at the funeral. We just heard from one of the speakers there, was clearly very moved. What was it like for you? This was your commander-in-chief, of course, for so long.
Well, Piers, of course, it was a huge privilege to be there. But, I think the thing that was probably perhaps most significant, my wife and I were sitting in the nave. We were in the front row of the nave. But as the late Queen's coffin came by, only 2, 3, 4 feet away from one thought, this is now really serious. This is the end of her fantastic reign. And they just brought it home at that particular moment. I mean, the service was fantastic. The singing was wonderful. The Archbishop spoke well. The lessons were read well. But just that moment of the coffin passing by, my wife curtsied, I bowed. I mean, that's what we should do. We just suddenly both said afterwards, that's the moment under our noses, as it were, in front of us. This wonderful 70-year reign has ended, but now we've got to look forward to the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at Buckingham Palace all day, And I felt that moment actually when the procession passed by the palace, and I looked behind me and I saw the hearse coming towards the end of the procession. So it had been like a good 15, 20 minutes of procession first. And then suddenly the crowd went very quiet and you saw the hearse come. And then I just watched the hearse go round the corner of the big sort of centrepiece there and come right in front of the palace. I think we're looking at the images now. And I found that a really moving moment because I suddenly realised that would be my last glimpse of the Queen that I would ever have. And I found that very moving, actually. And I think a lot of people have been quite surprised how emotional they felt about all this.
Piers, I think you're absolutely right. And those who then, whether they were present or watching on television, I think when you saw the shots of the committal service later on this afternoon and of the new king and the national anthem was sung, you could just see his eyes welling up when he realised that, yes, this was the moment. His beloved mother, our beloved Queen, has now gone, and all the responsibilities of the kingdom now lie on his shoulders, and it weighed up. I think for all of us, at some point during the day, the point really came home that this wasn't just theatre, this wasn't just pageantry, this wasn't just what the UK does best, what Britain does best. This was real, it was personal, and it was the end of the second Elizabethan era. But I think we have to be positive. And I think the Archbishop's sermon was absolutely right. Hope is a very important part of today. Fantastic what Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has done, the leadership she's shown, the dedication to duty. But we move on. And we now have a new king. We've got a lot of difficulties in the country, energy crisis, cost of living crisis, new Prime Minister. We've got to move on. We've got to move forward. We've got to set our sights ahead of ourselves. But like this sort of ancient ploughmen who were ploughing their furrows. They picked something just ahead of them, and they drove their horses towards it, and that's the straight line that they took. We've got to take a straight line to better places. And frankly, we've got a new king, we've got a new Prime Minister. I'm apolitical, but we've just got to drive this country forward. There's so much opportunity here. Let's rejoice in what's happened in the past, but actually fix our energy and our hope on the future. This is a great country. It has been a great country. It is a great country. And it will continue to be a great country. We've all got to put our shoulders into the work.
Absolutely magnificently said. You're not available to join the cabinet, are you? Any capacity. We'll take you as anything, Lord Dannatt.
No, I will if I'm asked.
Well, you know what? We could do an awful lot worse than having someone with your attitude, because we need a bit of positivity and can-do mentality, and you were certainly like that when you ran the British Army. It's been a great honour to have you tonight on this very special occasion, given that you were there in your capacity as one of our finest soldiers. So thank you very much.
And Piers, thank you. Are we still on?
Yes, we are, yeah.
Yep. One of the lovely things was, as all the royal family came past, Prince Harry looked in our direction and said to my wife, "Hello, Pippa." Just wonderful that he was back. I just think Harry is great. I just hope he's got a role to play in our country in the future.
I mean, it is such a shame, isn't it, what's going on there, because there's clearly this huge rift with the two brothers. There's a rift between King Charles and his son Harry. And at the moment, it seems quite deep-rooted. But you do get a sense that Harry, having been immersed back into his former life in the last 10 days, it would take a heart of stone, which I don't think he has, to not be personally affected by it in a way that may make him think, am I going the right way with my new life? You know, constantly attacking the family, the monarchy and so on. Is this really helping anybody?
Well, I think the events of the last few days must have had a significant effect on Prince Harry and his wife Meghan. I don't know what their private thought processes are, what their personal ambitions are. But what I do know, absolutely, is that Harry loves this country. He loved the armed forces. His time in the army, his 2 deployments to Afghanistan, and I was quite involved in both of those, were absolutely formative in his life. I wish him all the best. I wish Meghan all the best. But frankly, from my point of view, and I think the British Armed Forces point of view, and a veteran's point of view, we miss Harry. We love Harry. I don't know how the future's going to work out, but I hope he's got a role to play in this country in the future.
Well, I hope he was listening to that, because I think coming from you, that will mean a lot to him. You know, my brother-in-law actually taught him at Sandhurst and said he spoke very highly of him. Said he was an excellent soldier, as indeed William was, very popular with the other guys, and he feels very sad about it too.
Well, I persuaded Harry after his first tour in Afghanistan, when he wanted to go back there. I said, Harry, the only thing you can do is go back within the anonymity of a helicopter cockpit. And, cut a long story short, he trained to be a helicopter pilot, and he was a good helicopter pilot. And on his weapons course, he was the top gun. So he's a top soldier, bless him. Such a great guy. And all the soldiers, all the veterans absolutely worship him. He has a significant role to play in this country. Somehow he and Meghan have got to find a way to balance their lives between whatever they want to do in the States, in California, but actually he has a role to play in this country. I know he can't be a part-time royal, but somehow there's got to be a role for him, because actually we need him here. A lot of people love him.
Do you know what I think he needs, Lord Dannatt?
And we miss him, frankly.
It's very interesting listening to you talk, because you know him well, and you know what he feels, obviously, about a lot of the military part of his life. I think maybe he needs a trip from you. Maybe get on a plane to California and go and talk some sense into him.
Well,
the weather's nice this time of year.
But yeah, absolutely right. Well, yeah, maybe. Well, Piers, thank you for the suggestion. If you'd like to send me a ticket, yeah, off we go, and let's see what happens. But actually, it's not for me to determine his life and his family's life. He's got his own issues. But all I'd say is that he has played a significant role in this country. I hope he continues to find a way to play a significant role in this country within the sort of wider environment of the royal family. But it was just great to see him here today. And, yeah, well, you know, been a fantastic day, a tragic day, a sad day, but we have to move forward. And King Charles III, God save the King.
Lord Dannatt, what a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Piers.
Fascinating conversation. Well, joining me now is Talk TV presenter Sharon Osbourne, the Times political sketch writer Quentin Letts, Talk TV contributor Esther Cracky. Well, I wasn't expecting that, actually, Sharon, Lord Dannatt, giving that kind of take on Harry, and I actually found it quite moving, because he knows him from his military time, clearly feels very sad about what's happened, but, you know, as part of his positivity call, trying to see if there's a way back for him. Well, what do you think?
Well, I felt the same when I saw him back in this country and I saw him part of the royal family again. It made me very sad. I honestly felt sad that, you know, this is his home, this is where he belongs. The country loved him so much, and I'm sure they still do, the majority. And it's just like, listen, nobody knows what goes on in any family, let alone the royal family. But was it so drastic that you had to turn to California to live a life like a celebrity?
Yeah. Quentin Letts, you're a brilliant sketch writer. I don't even know where you start with a day like today.
Well, I think you start with the fact that it was a state occasion. It was very, very stately. And it's been a brilliant success in that respect.
Were you moved personally by it?
I was less moved today than I expected to be until Windsor.
Right.
And I thought the Windsor service, perhaps because it had a bit more Cranmer to it, a bit more prayer book to it, and was not quite so encumbered by stately majesty. I thought that Windsor sort of got me going a bit more. But the silence in the Abbey service between the last post and Reveille, that was a very powerful moment for me.
Yeah.
And also the arrival of the coffin being pulled by the naval ratings. They came on and the music stopped, and then they did 15 extra paces and then halted.
Yeah.
And as they marched, they were marching on sand. It made a strange sound. It made a sound a bit like shaking brown sugar in a packet. Very powerful. Just the sound of those marching footsteps coming to a halt. That was a moment that stood out to me.
Some people are seeing this as a kind of re-energised view to the world of what Britain does best, and therefore fantastically positive and forward-looking, re-energising the monarchy. Others have said maybe this is, the beginning of the end. This is the top it's ever going to be. That this monarch was as great as we could ever expect, and that actually support for the monarchy will now slowly start to fade away. What do you think?
Well, I suspect that the poll numbers, if you judge these things by polls, which I don't, by poll ratings, then possibly there will be a little bit of a decline for a bit, because that's inevitable after such an enormous peak like this. But what you saw today, and what you've seen the last 10 days, is the public saying, we are proud of our country, we are proud of our crown, we like things the way that they are, we think this is a pretty good place to live, and the way that has been asserted by the public will be absorbed by politicians. And I think perhaps the political class will be less beholden to Twitter in the future.
The problem with the political class, it seems to me, in comparison to, say, this Queen in particular, we never knew what she thought about anything. And in fact, if anything ever got leaked, it was the biggest story of all time, because we just never heard what her thoughts were publicly about anything. It didn't mean she didn't have them. She just didn't express them in public.
Well, she was not disputatious, was she? She was the opposite of disputatiousness.
She was a completely unifying person.
She was a fount of calm.
Right. So how do politicians who necessarily take strong positions on issues which are necessarily politically polarising, how can they hope to emulate that kind of unifying spirit? And the same applies in America, where it's almost impossible now. Everything is split down the middle. Half the country believes one thing about most stuff, half the country believes the other, and there's no coming together.
United. It is no longer United States of America.
You and Oz are coming back because it is so divisive.
Well, because I think the politicians, the answer to that is the politicians have to disagree, because debate is essential in Parliament.
But it's got so toxic.
But at the same time, they need to take their lead much less from that engine of rancour that is social media.
Yes.
And I think that too much of our politics and our political discourse has been guided by the rancour.
The latest pile-on from social media,
yes. Those things really don't matter.
Right. Esther, what do young people make of today, of King Charles, of the monarchy, of the future? You're a young person.
I've actually seen... I was quite surprised. I saw a lot of posts on social media, obviously bidding farewell to the Queen and actually saying, God save the King. I've actually seen kind of an uptick in patriotism that I wasn't expecting.
Right.
I'm very curious, though, how the new Prime Minister, the relationship she will have with King Charles, because he's obviously very vocal on things like the Rwanda policy, on green policy and all of that. I just wonder what sort of their weekly meetings will be, because it's a lot harder to...
Well, funny enough, Sharon and I were talking about this on Fox this afternoon, and I took slight issue, because, Sharon, you think he's going to continue to be outspoken about issues he cares about, because he's been proven right about some of them.
Absolutely.
But I think he has made a decision that now he's monarch, he's not going to do this. I really think he's decided that the only way to be a popular and long-surviving monarch, beloved by the people like his mother, is just to simply stop making public pronouncements about anything that is remotely political, and that would include things like climate change, which are dear to his heart. So I just don't think we're going to see him do that.
The one thing that you did say was absolutely right, that you're never going to please the mob. It's always going to be half of it that's against you.
Yeah.
So
whatever opinion you express. Look, we know. I could go on Twitter and say, I love Monday, right, as a day. And within 10 minutes, there would be the most unbelievable pile of people agreeing with me. Oh, I love it. I love Monday. My favourite day of the year. And here's why. Other people say, are you mad? Have you lost your mind? Monday's the worst day of all time. In other words, everything has to immediately lead to an extreme reaction. Everything has to be a toxic debate. It can't be just a bit of fun. And that's the way Twitter, in particular, social media, has whipped everyone in a kind of permanent lather. And I don't divorce myself from part of this, by the way, because I quite often get sucked in and start, having
You're
a go.
You're a very consensual figure, aren't you?
I like to think that I am somebody who expresses firmly held opinions.
Oil on the water.
I'm not taking divisive lectures from you, Lex, one of the most brilliant and yet pungent writers in the business.
I don't think Charles can possibly become political.
He can't, can he?
He can't. And if he looks at his mother's record, I mean, his
well, obviously, he
advisors
can't continue to be political because he has been
No,
quite
he can't
political.
continue to do that.
Yeah.
And I think he accepted that on the first Friday when he said, my role is now going to change.
Yes.
And he has to just pull back from that and be a much more tranquil presence.
And he has to be
But
inclusive.
I do hope that, I mean, his is a face that naturally frowns a lot.
Yes.
I want my king... I'm proud of King Charles. I love Charles.
To smile more.
I want him to smile more.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's good at laughter.
I mean,
and
look,
want
let's
to see
be
that
fair.
side of him.
He is
so far in his
course.
reign, he's been mourning his mother.
Of course.
And I think that's easy to
no, that's a
forget.
given.
He's had to tour the country, probably take 100 phone calls a day from world leaders and stuff.
Yeah. He's exhausted.
Console
Absolutely.
his family, show us he's king. I mean, the pressure on the guy is just unbelievable. He took it out on a pen. That's how bad things are.
Yeah.
Sharon, what does it say about our country today, do you think? What did you feel when you were watching it? Were you getting emotional about a country from the past that we're slightly losing or have lost? Or did you feel in a way it was a good chance to refocus us on what makes this country great?
A bit of both.
Yeah.
Really, Piers, a bit of both. I loved the way that the whole country was so united and so together, and there was so much positivity when you would go into the streets. And yet there are, certain groups here that are against royalty, but I think overall, I think the royalty, I hope to God, is safe here.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. But I think it would be... We have a special thing. There's 40-odd monarchies left in the world, of which 12 are European. You could take all the European royals outside of ours down Tottenham Court Road and nobody would know who they are, right?
Faceless.
So I think that we are in a very unique position with our monarchy. It is a unique institution in terms of fame and global renown, right?
I think it's in safe hands. I think one of the things I would say about the younger generation, we're genuinely excited about William and Kate. And I think what would be really smart for Charles to do is to draw on that. Any sort of engagements that he has that, is very near and dear to his heart, he should actually make sure that William is very present there, because it's kind of like handing down the mantle.
What's going to happen, Quentin, with the Commonwealth? You're seeing Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand saying it's inevitable that in her lifetime New Zealand will go republic. Australia's flirting with it. It has a new leader, Anthony Albanese, who is certainly... not being full-on Republican, but certainly indicated that he may go that way if the people wanted it. You're seeing some of the Caribbean countries immediately indicating they want to have referendums within several years. This could, if he's not careful, King Charles III, you could get a domino effect of countries suddenly thinking the Commonwealth as a concept is over.
I think that there are two slightly different things being conflated there, whether or not Charles is head of state, or whether or not countries are part of the Commonwealth. It's two slightly different things. I think you have to let those countries decide for themselves. And to try to resist that or try to impose our royal family as their heads of state as well would be entirely wrong and counterproductive. And so you live and let live. And you let these countries decide for themselves.
How much is the racism allegation which Meghan Markle, the first biracial member of the royal family, of course, how much has her racism claims, do you think, Esther, had an impact, but certainly in some of the Caribbean countries?
I do think it's had a negative impact, but not as much as people think, because I don't think they're highly respected figures, Harry and Meghan. I think they come across as quite whingy. And I genuinely think most people that talk about the Commonwealth don't understand it. There's so many people in the Commonwealth that were glued to their TVs today. There's so many people from the Commonwealth that actually are very fond of the monarchy and the royal family for various reasons. I think one thing I have noticed with sort of the Republican wave is it's very cyclical in terms of politics. So you have a Labour leader in Australia, you have Jacinda Ardern, who couldn't be more left-wing if she tried. They're always more on the Republican side of things. But again, if, the elections swing the other way and you have more right-leaning governments in, they're not probably going to push for
By the way, Quentin, there was a moment today where, have you done your sketch for tomorrow?
I've filed.
Because I don't know if you spotted this, but there was an Australian crew, I think it was. There's a clip of an Australian crew. Now, we all had difficulty today identifying public figures, right? A lot of them were, heads of states, which we just didn't recognise and so on. But you would have thought they
That would have been Liz Truss, by the way.
Have you seen this? Have you seen this? Look at this.
Who's this?
No, hard to identify. Maybe minor royals, members of the... I can't identify them at this point.
We can't spot everyone, unfortunately. They look like they could well be local dignitaries. It's hard to see. We're looking at the backs of their heads mostly.
But I think we are now getting to the pointy end, as they say, of the... I'm just told that was Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, in the distance that we could see hopping out of that car.
Come on, Australia!
Down to the dregs.
For
By the way, did you see the spider?
I recognised your Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, immediately and announced him on American television.
I think you're 2 ahead of me there. But did you see the spider? When the coffin came in at the west door and was being carried into the Abbey, there was a spider visible on the wreath. It was a lovely touch.
Really?
I thought a lovely moment. There was a living creature on the coffin.
It was, yeah, I mean, I love moments like that.
Tony Blair, did you see Tony Blair? Wearing his garter. He needs a haircut, I thought.
I think he's morphing back to his old rock god days, isn't he?
Do you
Tony
think?
Blair?
I didn't recognise him.
Yeah.
I honestly
It's quite
didn't
funny
recognise
watching them
him.
all together, because what I'm told is, I was asking someone who's, connected to one of the Prime Ministers, and all the living Prime Ministers were there. So you've got John Major, you've got Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, you've got David Cameron, you've got Theresa May and Boris Johnson. And although... Here's David Cameron today. Although this is all of them we're going to see coming past here. So there's Gordon Brown. So you have them all these incredibly different people, all of whom have been at loggerheads at various stages with each other. There's the rock god, Tony.
There's the old waxwork.
But it's an interesting thing that apparently when they all get together, there is a shared commonality of experience of being Prime Minister that actually does bring them together a bit.
Except for Major and Boris.
Is that right?
They will not talk.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Is that right?
Complete daggers drawn. They're always kept as far apart as possible. Only plastic knives when those two are around.
Is it really?
Yeah.
But it must be a strange club. There's only 6 of them, aren't there, left?
It's quite a lot. We've never had so many.
How many surviving? There's only about 5, 6 US presidents. I mean, these are small clubs that people are in.
Yeah, they've known the codes to the nuclear button. And that does have a sort of... a gelling thing, and also they're in probably the same speakers.
I mean, actually, I think it's 4 American presidents, isn't it? How many are still alive? Trump, Biden, Obama, Clinton, Carter. 5.
Yes. Yeah.
And Carter's now in his late 90s, I think. Extraordinary man, actually.
Yeah.
Biden, I thought, should have been given a more prominent position today. I thought it was a pity that our most important ally wasn't perhaps given a slightly better seat. I think he was down somewhere near the top man from Andorra, I think, was near him. But, that's the democracy of a church service. And what a lot of fantastic singing there was.
Yes.
The hymn singing, I thought
the choristers were fantastic.
Yes, I wasn't sure about some of the music in the Abbey. The Macmillan piece didn't really do it.
Did you get emotional, Sharon, watching?
Very.
Did you, yeah? What was the moment through the whole day where you were most affected, do you think?
It was just one of those days where you really just wanted to concentrate on watching every minute of it. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just wanted to watch it all because, as I said to you earlier, it's history.
The moment for me, actually, was when, right at the end, when her coffin started to be lowered.
Oh.
I found that very, very affecting on me. Because I thought, well, that really is the end. That's it. That's going to be the last moment we see the Queen.
I thought, this is it. She's now with her husband.
Yes, well, that's the uplifting part of the day.
Right at the very start, at the Abbey, there was the ringing, the tolling, 96 times, of the Kenner bell to the Abbey. And you'll have been to English country church funerals.
Very much so.
They do the same thing. They ring the bell. They don't ring it 96 times, of course.
Yeah.
But the single bell summoning the faithful to prayer. And the mourners to prayer, and I thought that was very effective.
Of course,
that was because at the heart of this was a state occasion, but it's also an Anglican funeral.
Yes.
And the commendation when the Archbishop of Canterbury, I haven't always been his greatest fan, Justin Welby.
I don't imagine many people are.
But he did it very well. The commendation at the end, where he said, "Go forth, O Christian soul."
Yeah.
It was very touching.
It was.
This was a narrow coffin there. Narrow coffin. Did you notice how narrow it was?
Tiny.
And that was the focus on it, was on the coffin.
Thank you, Vinod. Sharon, we're going to love you and leave you. Thank you very much, Lee. You're being replaced by one of the world's greatest historians. I'm sure you won't mind. There he is, waiting in the wings, Anthony Selden. Fascinating to see what he thinks about this from a historical perspective. There he is. Well, tonight, Queen Elizabeth II has been laid to rest with her husband, Prince Philip, at a private ceremony. Earlier, she arrived at St George's Chapel in Windsor for an intimate committal service and one last public goodbye. She was separated from her crown, orb and sceptre for the final time. Well, as I said, joining me now is historian Sir Anthony Selden, and still with the Times political sketch writers Quentin Letts and Talk TV contributor Esther Kraku. What a day. I mean, from a historian point of view, what were you thinking as you watched all this unfurl today?
Magical, extraordinary. Yeah. Can any other country on earth do it like that? Why are a quarter of the world's population, is it more or less about that, listening to this? What are they thinking? What do they think of these extraordinary buildings and traditions? And is this going to be the final moment? Is this the end of the long Second World War, and now there'll be just a long recessional for Britain as it goes forward? Or can we reinvent ourselves post-Brexit and with a new monarch and find a new identity and sense of purpose?
What's the answer?
Well, I think we absolutely can. I think the monarch's going to be really important in that. I think we all misunderstand the monarch. The monarch is like the chair of a company. The monarch keeps the tradition, the history,
and
has a long-term interest.
And values as well.
Absolutely. I mean, look, 15 prime ministers for Elizabeth. They come and go. They strut on the stage. They signify not very much. Very few of them make any difference. The monarchy holds Britain in its arms and carries it forward. It cares about the physical fabric, the culture, the traditions. It cares about the deep education. So I think the monarchy, I mean, I think Charles was ahead of his time in so many ways.
What I felt today was, certainly quite strongly at various points, was after all the chaos of our government, the Boris Johnson administration, Partygate, all that kind of stuff. Reminded, of course, of the picture of the Queen at Philip's funeral on her own in a mask, obeying the rules because she thought that was her duty, and it turned out half of Downing Street were on the lash inside the building the night before, and so on. You know, all that sort of disrespect and undignified conduct in the highest echelons of our establishment. This was a reminder, actually, of the very, very best of our conduct as a country and dignity and establishment.
World-class, servant leadership. We loved her because it was never about me, her publicity, her money. She was dignified. She cared for people. She knew how to behave at all times. I wonder how those leaders in the Abbey today and those watching who wish they were there think, who lead often brutal, arrogant, selfish, extravagant lives.
It was a very interesting point, wasn't it, Quentin, by the Archbishop of Canterbury when he made this speech about why the Queen was so beloved, because she gave herself to service to others. And she's, you know, unlike, he said, those who cling to power and privilege. And you were looking around the room thinking, well, there's quite a few here that might have blanched
And he was pointing straight down the South Transept at that point, which is where all the world leaders were sitting. So well done, Welby, on that front.
Yeah.
I think I just go back to this idea of this event today, but also the last 10 days, has been about a revival of peacefulness.
Yeah.
And that has been why the Queen was... One of the reasons was that she was so dearly loved, was that she was this idea of silence against all the to-do and clamour of the political world. Now, we're inevitably going to return to some of that clamour, but maybe it can just be a little bit less frantic.
Do you know what? I wish you were right. I've got a horrible feeling.
I've got a horrible feeling I'm wrong.
Very quickly, probably tomorrow morning, we're all going to get stuck back into...
But even just hearing you, Piers, talking about Partygate there, it suddenly felt terribly old-fashioned.
No, I'm not talking about Partygate.
No, but...
I know what you mean.
The idea of all that...
I'm more concerned about the actual reality of the cost of living crisis.
Yes, no, that would be much more honourable.
Of the war in Europe and so on. So there's lots of massive things for a rookie Prime Minister and a rookie monarch to have to come to terms with. I want to bring in Douglas Murray, who... I think you're in New York, Douglas?
I am.
What's it been like to be in New York watching all this as a Brit from afar?
Well, of course, it's very painful in many ways because there's nothing that makes you feel so homesick as seeing everything at home so incredibly well and dignifiedly performed, seeing the real depths we have in Britain, the extraordinary rich traditions we have. It's very painful to see it and not to be a part of it, but I'm sure that many millions of people around the world have felt that. For me, the extraordinary thing about the day was not just, again, the opportunity to reflect on the legacy of Elizabeth II, and indeed to think forward, as so many people have, but to reflect on one of the things that the Queen said several times in her Christmas messages, which was to remind us not to throw out things just because newfangled ideas come in. And today we saw a number of British institutions, perhaps all of them, at their very best. And Britain and Britishness has been undergoing a very strange business in the last 20 years, forever questioning itself, forever saying, what are we? Who are we? And really the answer was there today. Britain is a set of institutions which reciprocates the public. It mirrors the public. The public are the institutions are the public. The institution gains its legitimacy not by force of arms, but by honouring the public, and the public then honour them back. The reciprocity of institutions was there today, of the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and of course the Church of England. And that's one of the most interesting ones, of course, today, because we saw the proper traditional rights of the Church of England, both in Westminster Abbey and in St George's, Windsor. The Church of England over recent decades, for a long time now, has been throwing out its great liturgy, has been throwing away the great musical tradition that it has, one of the richest musical traditions in the world. But we saw it again today, and we heard it again today, and we saw that this is what is appropriate to deep moments like this. So I would like to think that after today, among many other things, we might reflect on the fact that we have great inheritances in Britain, which it is our task to sustain because they are things of great value.
I completely concur with every single word you just said. Beautifully put. I want to bring in broadcaster and campaigner Dame Esther Ranson now. Dame Esther, when I knew you were coming on tonight, I was thrilled to hear you were coming on. And as I've been waiting to speak to you, it's just been confirmed the Queen has now been buried beside her husband, Prince Philip. You, of course, had famously a wonderful marriage and sadly lost your husband. I felt the Queen went quite downhill quite fast after she lost Philip. What did you feel looking at that from afar?
Yes, possibly. Obviously, that love, that partnership sustained her. She said so, didn't she? My stay and my rock. And those of us who've had partners who have been supportive, not uncritical, you know, not doormats, but certainly there when you need them. It makes a huge difference. And I was very mindful of the number of people. I mean, Desi died in the year 2000, so I've had 22 years to get used to it. But I know a lot of the callers to the Silver Line, you know, when people live the great, the price you pay for old age is that you lose your closest relatives, your closest friends sometimes. And so I was talking to people on the Silver Line helpline. I think we should pay tribute to all the people in all the charities who were working today, because they knew that there would be people that needed them. And that was true both of Childline and of the Silver Line. But one of the callers today said, I'm at home dressed in black, I've got flowers, and I've prepared my lunch, so I'm ready to watch the funeral. The Queen's death has brought back memories of when my sister died. It's such a sad day. You know, I think for a lot of people, it wasn't only an opportunity to watch these magnificent funerals, both in the Abbey and in Windsor, which was so moving, wasn't it? The smaller funeral too. But it was also a moment to try perhaps and come to terms with one's own loss. Or maybe if there's someone in our own lives or in our friendship group that may be having grief stirred up by memories, maybe we should bring them up and say...
Or actually loneliness. There was a wonderfully evocative cartoon in the Time today, I don't know if you saw it, by Morton Morland, which went viral online today. And just, you know, the cartoon speaks for itself. It's an elderly man on his own with an empty chair next to him, clearly his partner, who we presume has died, watching the funeral on his own. And it really resonated with people because that's really about loneliness. One of the many things, of course, that Silver Line tackles so well with our elderly in this country. But loneliness can be very difficult for people, particularly at times like this, which are unifying times. And people do like to watch them with their partners or wives or husbands or families, whatever it may be. If you have no one to watch it with, it can almost exacerbate the feelings of loneliness and grief that you may have.
I think that's absolutely right, Piers. I totally agree with you. I think when I wrote about my feelings of loneliness, I had the most touching letter from a gentleman I got to know well called Bob, who died just before his 100th birthday. And he said that it was at that time 65 years since he married his beloved Kath, who had recently died of Alzheimer's. But he said, more to the point, 72 years since we first kissed. And she waited for me throughout the war, and I for her. Loneliness, tell me about it.
Yeah.
And I think an awful lot of people of the Queen's generation, but not only of the Queen's generation, will be missing desperately the shoulder that they used to lean on, the hand they used to hold.
Yes. Dame Esther, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Greatly appreciate it on this very historic day for the country. Anthony Selden, we've got to look now to the new king, the future. Lord Dannatt earlier talking about the need to be positive as a country. We've got a lot of difficult issues to deal with. How important is this monarch going to be in positioning that positivity for the country, do you think?
Well, he's in a slight trap, isn't he? Because if he does talk out about the issues he cares about, he will get slaughtered. The media and critics have held off attacking the Queen. She was simply unassailable. Yes. And now there's a lot of pent-up rage, and they're just looking for Charles to make a slip. And yet, if he doesn't assert himself as the long-term voice of the custodian monarchy, we talk about the welfare monarchy, we need to talk about the custodian monarchy. Nobody else can care for this country and its long-term vitality and interest better than the monarch. The Prime Minister, they're elected on a slender majority. You're right, monarchies are in decline. Those that are left, Japan does well, very few. No one, I don't think, does it as well as Britain, underpinning democracy, finding that way forward with Liz Truss and with her successors to somehow get the best out of the British people, make it work again. So we're not looking back, we're looking forward, and Britain has a unique role in the world, not just because of its language and its culture and its history, where there's so much to be proud of.
Esther, it's a big challenge for these two rookies.
Yeah, definitely.
The rookie monarch, albeit incredibly well qualified, and the rookie Prime Minister, who, came 2 weeks ago. I came back from a break, and there was the new Prime Minister, and then the next day she met the Queen, and then 2 days later the Queen was dead, and we have a new king, and then we have this today. This is an extraordinary baptism of fire for a Prime Minister already facing myriad difficult challenges.
Yep, absolutely. And you know what's funny? I hear that the Queen's favourite Prime Minister was actually Churchill, right? Because she was in awe of him.
Well, it was her first Prime Minister.
Exactly.
And I think probably in terms of character, the most that she would,
Resolute,
the one she would have
probably.
most. Yes,
exactly.
Because he epitomised resilience and determination and stoicism, and his thing was keep buggering on, KBO.
Exactly.
Hers was just get on with it. Similar kind of attitude.
Yeah, and I'm really hoping that Liz Truss has that same attitude, because we know that she's facing a myriad of problems. I actually really do not envy her, because I wouldn't want to be in her position. But I also, I actually feel for Charles as well, because this is his first roll of the dice in that way, and he's really stepping into this huge role. The future of the monarchy effectively rests on his shoulders.
It's not an easy thing.
Exactly.
We've got a few minutes left, Quentin. Sum up this day and what it means and how history will judge this day, do you think?
Well, this day will, I think, be bigger than the effect, will have a bigger effect than the funeral of poor Diana did. After Diana's death, the country changed. I think we can all remember that, and the country became better at gushing and being more emotional and more relaxed about life. And I suspect there may be a little bit of a tilt of the other wing now after this, because I suspect that what Douglas was saying is correct, and that in our wider culture, and in our poets and our writers and our painters and our musicians, will perhaps reconnect with the idea that the old and the traditional had some value.
Yes.
And so I think there may be some of that. I wouldn't go... You were talking earlier about, the tremendous challenges facing the Prime Minister and the King. I think you're loading too much onto those two people, and
they're the figureheads, right?
Events take their course. Electoral politics will happen, whatever happens, and that will probably go wrong for somebody. That's always happens.
Well, Keir Starmer's going to play the national anthem for the first time at the Labour Party conference. We haven't heard that for a while.
For the king himself, I think the ideal for me would be a king who is just there, who is alongside us, who is a sympathetic ear, who is not trying to look after our morale. Let's look after our own morale.
Douglas, have we got to stop apologising as a country for our past? Would that be a good way to move positively forward?
A good way to move forward isn't just to stop apologising, but to actually know about it. There was a time, maybe a couple of 100 years ago, where anyone saying anything negative about Britain might have had a bit of a problem domestically. Today, it's the exact reverse of that, the inverse of it. Unless you bash Britain, people think you're doing something wrong. Look at all the people who've come out of the woodwork in the last couple of weeks with their rancid opinions about our history and our culture. I would say that the job of us now is to retain and explain. That's something people use in museum terminology. We retain our culture and we explain it to people. Many people around the world will have watched today's events and been wondering, what's that about? Who's that? What's the symbolism of that? But they'll have learned some of it. And, you know, we have seen an extraordinary period. And as Anthony Selden and others just mentioned, we've seen a transition of a monarch and a prime minister within days of each other. And what other country in the world would be able to carry out a peaceful transition like that but our own country? Other countries, including America, can't manage it. Imagine if we'd been undergoing a presidential election and a prime ministerial election. The point is that Britain continues, the monarchy continues, our institutions continue, but they don't continue merely like oxygen. They continue because the people who are committed to them sustain them. And so I would like to think that people remember after a day like today that the job of any generation isn't just to sustain what is good, but to keep it going, to pass it on. And that is something that I think many people will have been inspired to do from today. And to remember, as Quentin just said, that we had other values that aren't so bad. It's not so good to let everything out. It's not so good to be me time. It's good to live a life of service to your nation, to your circle around you, to your loved ones, and to the things that matter.
Yeah.
And if we ever saw somebody who epitomised that, it was Elizabeth II.
Absolutely right. Douglas Murray, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Sir Anthony Selden, thank you. Quentin Letts, Esther Kraku. Well, that brings an end to our 2-hour special. We could have done probably 22 hours, frankly, on what happened today. It was just a unique, extraordinary, wondrous day in so many ways. This country at its absolute greatest. The greatest for pomp, for pageantry, for monarchy, but also the greatest for the values that this monarch represented. And I've talked about this a few times in the last 10 days. I want to end by reminding people what those values are so that we can all try and learn and take from those values. Stoicism, resilience, dignity, humility, strength of character, not playing the victim. Don't complain all the time. Don't explain too much. Be careful what you say, and when you say it, mean it. And stand by your own principles. Don't get blown in the wind by whatever the next headline is. If you're like that, you will be more like our Queen. And that will make us all better people. So thank you, Your Majesty, again, for everything that you taught us. And that leads us to our final farewell to Britain's greatest ever monarch. It's goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II and our heartfelt gratitude.
We come to this house of God, where Queen Elizabeth was married and crowned. We gather from across the nation, from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world, to mourn our loss.
He that hath seen me hath seen the Father. Thanks be to God.
All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, we will meet again.